She's trespassing on HOA property. Seize him by force if we have to. Karen's voice tore through the quiet evening like a siren. I froze halfway through carrying in my second box of tools, staring at her army of clipboard-wielding neighbors marching across my front yard. I had only signed the papers for this little farmhouse 2 days ago. It was a mile outside their HOA boundary, separated by a narrow creek and a dirt road, but that didn't seem to matter to her. "Ma'am, you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This house isn't under your HOA. You don't have any—" "Don't talk back to me," she snapped, pointing at the porch like she owned it. "This whole area used to be ours. The board hasn't approved your purchase. Pack your things and go." Behind her, a couple of men shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure about being there. One of them whispered, "Karen, this isn't legal." She whirled on him. "Quiet! He thinks he can hide behind that creek and ignore our rules. Not happening." Then she looked back at me, eyes glittering. "If you don't vacate by tomorrow, we'll get the sheriff involved, or we'll seize you by force if we have to." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but her face was dead serious. My dog, Rusty, barked from inside, sensing the tension. "I have the deed right here," I said, lifting the folder from the box I was carrying. "You have no authority over me or this property. If you try anything, it'll be trespassing." Karen stepped closer until we were just a few feet apart. "You don't know who you're dealing with. The board has connections, and we can make your life miserable." For a moment, I felt that twist in my stomach, the kind you get when you realize someone might actually be crazy enough to follow through. But I wasn't about to show it. "You're making a big mistake," I replied quietly, "bigger than you realize." Her lips curled into a smug smile as if she'd already won. She signaled to her group to leave, tossing over her shoulder, "Enjoy your last night here. Tomorrow, you'll wish you never bought this place." I watched them retreat across the dirt road back into their subdivision, but that smile of hers lingered in my mind. There was something about the way she said it, like she knew something I didn't. I shut the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and muttered to Rusty, "Guess we just found out what kind of neighbors we've got." Rusty whimpered softly as thunder rumbled outside, and for the first time since I moved in, I had the uneasy feeling that this house might come with more trouble than I'd bargained for.
That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, Rusty started growling at the front door. His ears perked up like he heard something I couldn't. I grabbed the flashlight and peeked out the window, expecting nothing but darkness. Instead, I saw two silhouettes standing near my fence line, their flashlights clicking on and off as if they were signaling someone. One of them was pointing toward my shed. I stepped out onto the porch and called out, "You lost?" The two figures froze for a second, then bolted toward the subdivision. I couldn't see their faces, but one of them tripped over the fence and muttered something about Karen's orders before scrambling up and running off. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my front door. Notice of violation, unapproved structure, HOA board. I tore it off and shook my head. "Unbelievable," I muttered. Rusty sniffed the paper as I tossed it on the counter. Just then, a black SUV rolled to a stop outside my gate. Out stepped a man in a cheap suit carrying a clipboard. "Morning," I said cautiously as he approached. "Are you the new owner?" he asked, without so much as a hello. "Yeah, and you are?" "HOA enforcement officer. We've received reports that you've built a shed without proper permits. You're required to remove it within 72 hours or face a fine of $5,000. I couldn't help but laugh. First of all, this isn't your jurisdiction. Second, that shed came with the property. Maybe you should go talk to the previous owner. His expression hardened. Sir, refusing to comply will lead to legal action. Then go ahead, I said, folding my arms. But you'll be dealing with the county, not me. He scowled, muttered something into his phone, and walked back to his SUV. I watched him drive away, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. By noon, Karen showed up again, this time wearing sunglasses and dragging two men with her, one of them the same guy I'd seen at the fence last night. "I warned you," she said, loud enough for the neighbors across the creek to hear. "You ignored the notice. We're shutting down your shed today." She motioned for the men to head toward the shed, but I stepped in front of them. "Touch that shed, and I'll call the real sheriff right now." Karen's smile vanished. "Oh, we already called the sheriff. He's on his way, and he'll be on our side." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I pulled out my phone to call, but stopped. If the sheriff was really on the way, I'd rather face him myself. Rusty barked again from the porch as Karen leaned closer and whispered, "You're about to learn what happens when someone crosses me." I stared her down, saying nothing, but in the back of my mind, I remembered something the previous owner had told me about the land when I bought it, something that might change everything if I was right.
A few minutes later, a dusty county sheriff's cruiser pulled up at the edge of the dirt road. I expected relief, but the moment the deputy stepped out, my stomach dropped. Karen waved her arms like she was welcoming an old friend. "Over here, Deputy Miller. That's the man trespassing on our HOA property." I blinked. Trespassing? The deputy, an older man with a stiff jaw, strode toward us, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Sir, you want to tell me why you're refusing to comply with the HOA's orders?" "Because this house isn't under the HOA. It's county land. I've got the deed inside. Karen's making up claims." Karen interrupted, almost shouting, "This entire area falls under our historical district rights. The board voted years ago that these properties can't be owned or modified without HOA approval." "That's a lie," I shot back. "Check the county records. This land was separated from the HOA line after the creek shifted 10 years ago. It's on file." He scratched his chin. "I'm going to need to see those papers." I turned to go inside when Karen suddenly added, "He's lying! He's hiding weapons in that shed! That's why he won't let us near it!" The deputy's eyes narrowed. "Sir, is there anything in the shed I should know about?" "No, just tools and a lawnmower." She smirked. "Then you won't mind us opening it up?" That smugness in her voice made my blood boil. "You're not stepping foot in there without a warrant." For a long moment, it felt like the deputy was deciding whose side he was on. Finally, he sighed and said, "I'll need to see your deed first. If your paperwork checks out, nobody's touching your shed." I went inside, pulled out the folder, and handed him the documents. As he scanned them, his brows furrowed. Karen leaned in. "You see? It's fake! Look at that stamp!" "Quiet," the deputy said sharply. "This deed looks legitimate, but I need to verify it at the county office." Karen's face darkened. "While you waste time with paperwork, he'll move whatever's in that shed." I crossed my arms. "Or maybe you're just worried about what I'll find about you in the county records." Her lips tightened, and for the first time, she looked nervous. The deputy closed the folder. "Until I get confirmation, nobody's removing anything or trespassing here. Understood?" Karen forced a sweet smile. "Understood for now." As they walked back toward the cruiser, Karen whispered something to the man beside him. He nodded, and they both glanced back at the shed one last time before leaving. I stood there on the porch with Rusty at my side, watching the dust settle on the dirt road. Something told me Karen wasn't finished, and I had a feeling I'd need to check the county's land records myself before she twisted the law any further.
The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. I didn't tell Karen or even my closest neighbor. I just wanted the truth before she tried another stunt. The clerk behind the counter was an older woman who looked like she'd seen every land dispute in the county. "I need the original plat map for this property," I told her, sliding my address across the counter. She adjusted her glasses, scrolled through the database, and then looked up at me with a faint smile. "Oh, I remember this land. Used to be part of the HOA territory decades ago, but it was sold back to the county after the flood shifted the creek. You're well outside their jurisdiction now. So there's no HOA claim on it at all? Not a chance, she said. Then she lowered her voice. Funny thing is, the previous owner filed a water rights claim on the creek. This house controls the upstream water valve. If anyone owns anything here, it's you. I felt a spark of realization. The creek, the same one that separated my land from Karen's subdivision, was their main water source. I couldn't help but smile. Could I get a certified copy of that water rights document? I asked. Of course, she said. You're gonna need it. By the time I got home, I spotted Karen's car parked across the road with two of her board members. She didn't even bother to hide the fact that she'd been waiting for me. Back from your little trip to forge more papers, she called out. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I calmly unfolded the certified documents so she could see the county seal at the bottom. This says I own the property, the shed, and the water valve that feeds your subdivision. If you keep trespassing, I'll cut off the creek until the county sorts this out. For the first time, Karen's face went pale. The two men beside her exchanged uneasy glances. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. Try me, I replied. That evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard car doors slam outside. Karen had brought a small group of HOA members again, but this time they weren't yelling. They just stood there at the edge of my property, watching. I stepped out with Rusty at my side. If you're here to cause trouble again, I suggest you leave. I've already called the sheriff with proof of harassment. Karen's voice cracked slightly as she said, You can't threaten an entire community with that valve. We have families depending on that water. I shrugged. Then maybe stop trying to seize my land. I didn't start this war, Karen. You did. For a moment, she looked like she was about to explode, but then her shoulders sagged. She motioned for the group to head back to their cars. The next day, the sheriff returned with the official county verification. You're right, he told me with a small grin. Karen's got no claim over you. And as for that water valve, it's legally yours. If she keeps harassing you, you can file a restraining order. Karen avoided me for a few days after that, but I kept the valve key on my kitchen counter as a quiet reminder of who really held the power. That weekend, I stood on my porch with Rusty as the sun set over the creek. Guess we're staying, buddy, I said with a smile. Rusty wagged his tail, and for the first time since I moved in, I finally felt like this house was truly mine, safe from anyone who thought they could seize it by force.